All right, welcome everybody to Meet the Sponsors. This is our 16th episode. Today we have Scott Tilton. He's a co-founder and CEO of Hookit. I think Scott's been helping athletes with sponsorships for over 20 years, even longer than I have. He started Sponsor House in 2001, which I think 5 or 6 years later, around 2007, he rebranded as Hookit. And Hookit is now the leading AI-powered sponsorship analytics platform that tracks performance across social media and digital media. Scott, if I have these numbers right, you'll have to correct me. I think you deal with like 50,000 athletes and over 100 different properties. Is that right?
Yep. Yeah. So the original business model is still alive and well to this day. We've definitely pivoted and with the whole social media movement have kind of migrated into data and analytics and helping brands and teams and leagues, track and quantify what's happening across social. But yeah, those numbers are pretty accurate. It's we work with close to 100 brands and probably 35 different teams and leagues at this point. And then about 50,000 amateur athletes during the kind of prime season when everyone's out looking for deals.
Wow. Now, so a few years ago, you and I, we were just talking beforehand about the NHRA sponsor summits, which I missed because I haven't gone to one in a few years, but maybe 4 or 5 years ago, we were at one and you told me that the top 2 asks by sponsors are exclusivity and social. Can you explain that?
Yeah, so there's a company called IAG that does surveys of all the brands out there, and they want to really understand like what are brands looking for in their partnerships. So they're very different than each other. Exclusivity means that they are the category exclusive. So take a brand like Lucas Oil, they're the exclusive lubricant oil company that's associated with a particular property. But outside of that, social media was the number 2 most important thing, which is, now with Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, all these platforms being so massive and the number of followers and engagement that's happening out there, brands are really trying to get aligned with the social side of things because they know that it's such a powerful platform for them to be able to get their brand message out there and really work with the partners that they have to reach the followers that they have. So, social media has quickly become like the number 2 most important thing behind being the only brand that's represented in their category. So it's pretty powerful.
And then is that why you evolved to Sponsor House into Hookit, is because you saw the opportunity with analyzing data?
Yeah, absolutely. I think.
How did that work? How's the story evolve here?
Yeah, so 20 years is a long time. I started Sponsor House with RJ Krause, who's my longtime best friend from 7th grade. We actually grew up racing motocross together. And, I think we were pretty well ahead of our time back in the day. We had sponsors as amateurs and we were, Northeast racers, which isn't a hotbed for motocross. There's a lot of good riders that come out of there, but it's not California and it's not the South. And but we had sponsors growing up, even despite being kind of, regional B riders. So when we started Sponsor House, it was all around how do we help kind of streamline the process for brands because they're getting inundated with hundreds and in some cases thousands of applications every year. So we put the whole process online. And the ironic thing is that the way this whole thing started was RJ and I both got into tech pretty early. Shortly after college, we started getting into website design and graphic design and a little bit of coding. And we met a rider from New York named Ryan Mills. Not sure if anyone remembers him, but really phenomenal rider, athlete. Didn't have a lot of support back in the day when he was still kind of a local guy. And I met his dad, ironically, because I was trying to buy a dirt bike from him. And he's like, well, if you can help me out with doing resumes and, helping my son because he's such a fast rider, he's like, I'll give you a deal on the bike. And that's how the whole concept for Sponsor House started was we built Ryan a website. We helped him out with a resume. He started getting a lot more support. I think he was only 14 at the time. And then Ryan went on to be a factory racer and won a national or 2. And was a really phenomenal athlete. But so that's how the whole thing started back in the day. And when we started Sponsor House, I was only 24 years old. And, MySpace was the only social media platform that was out at the time, which is really dating us at this point. So Facebook didn't come around until 2004. Then it was Twitter, and then YouTube and Instagram. So during the evolution of while we were building the company, social media was really coming into the fold. And by 2010, Sponsor House, which was rebranded as Hookit, was so big that it was creating a bigger challenge in the industry because it was getting misused by a lot of riders. They're coming on and building fake profiles, and dealers were complaining because of circumventing the whole kind of dealer chain. So what we ended up doing was developing a score that helped quantify the commitment, performance, and reach of an athlete. And commitment was how often they did the sport. So we were tracking and at the time we were doing the contingency programs for KTM, Husqvarna, eventually Suzuki. So we were ingesting all the race result data, and we knew like who was racing, what races they were going to, how they were finishing at the races. So we had like the commitment and performance side covered because of the race results, we knew how much they traveled. So were they a local rider, or were they doing regional or national events? So we became a data company almost by accident because we were, trying to score the athletes to help them qualify for these brand programs and keep all the fake profiles out of the mix. So that's how we kind of evolved into this. And we later on were looking at the social side of things, and there was a bunch of athletes that had 40, 50,000 followers, and which is it's a big reach, and no one was looking at it as a part of the whole sponsorship value equation. So we said, why don't we start looking at some of the pro athletes? And we immediately looked, and Cristiano Ronaldo at the time I think had 100 million followers. He's got 660 million today, but we're like, that's freaking insane. Like there's so much potential there, and there's so many people engaging with this content, and people are only talking about TV, and it's so that's kind of how this whole thing kind of like unfolded. And in 2012 and 13, we immediately started evolving the platform to start tracking all the professional athletes and looking at how much engagement they were generating, how many followers they had. And that was all part of the reach component of our score. And fast forward to today, like the entire business is built off of that one piece of the score, of tracking like how many followers, how much engagement. The one kind of big change that we made in 2015 was that even though we were tracking how much engagement athletes were getting, we weren't looking at the content that they were posting and how brands were being promoted. And that's when the whole business changed, and we were able to quantify which brands are being promoted, how are they being promoted, what's the value associated with all this social content. And that's really how this whole thing evolved and kind of turned it into what it is today.
You got in way before most people were even using social media. And now, like you mentioned, MySpace, I remember that. And then, social media evolves, new companies come in and start to replace, and they have new algorithms which limit who they reach. How do you deal with the different and the evolving and the changing social media platform? Like is Facebook as relevant now as TikTok is, or is TikTok the new one? Or
it's pretty fascinating.
Platforms that are better than others for athletes?
Yeah, so Instagram and TikTok are kind of the go-to dominant platforms for athletes. TikTok's insane. I don't even use it, but looking at, there's an Olympic athlete that drove 100 million video views just during the Tokyo Olympics. Just random content that she was posting, but it was literally over a 2-week time frame. So TikTok has clearly kind of come into the fold of just this massive platform that is driving huge amounts of engagement. Instagram is a pretty close second when it comes to athletes, and then Facebook. Twitter, is still out there and people are definitely using it. But in terms of a value driver for sponsorship, it's definitely not as powerful as the others, mainly because there's just so much content and these tweets going out that are, in rapid fire that people don't even have time to engage with it. So it's really why Instagram and TikTok are, a lot more powerful from that regard.
So what I'm hearing is that instead of impressions and exposure, which I think most athletes sell in their decks and proposals, you're looking for engagements. How would you define engagement, and what can an athlete do to increase their engagements in order to increase value for sponsors? Because as you know, all athletes, or almost everybody out there, is using social media, but they're probably just putting logos or taking a drink or, hey, look at these new tires I just got. But what can an athlete do to encourage engagements that will increase their value other than just having the visual up?
Yeah, so there's a couple of things. Like, it obviously starts with the number of followers. The more followers you have, the more engagement you can potentially generate. That is the interesting thing about TikTok, is that content is mostly public for the most part. So things can go viral, and you might have 100,000 followers, but you could get 10 million views on something. Where on Facebook and Instagram, it's really limited to how many followers you have. That's your max. But so the way that we look at engagement is it's a like, a comment, a share, a retweet, and we separate that from video views. So we always talk about engagement and video views as two separate things. But yeah, in the early days, when we first started tracking social, we were really careful not to really tout the number of followers that somebody had, because there was a period of time there where people were buying followers, and you could have 10 million followers, but then you were only getting 50,000 interactions on a post. So there's clearly something wrong when you're not generating the engagement relative to the number of followers that you have. So that's largely gone away. I think that kind of got out there, and people stopped buying followers to try and kind of boost up their reach. But engagement now, it really just comes down to the content. Like, are you posting interesting things? It tends to kind of skew towards people that are doing wild stuff and just really good personalities, and they just like sharing everything that they're doing in their life. So you'll find athletes like Leticia Buffoni, who's a professional skateboarder from Brazil. We did a study on her for Nike, and she was like the #2 most valuable female athlete for Nike. And she had a fraction of the number of followers as like a Serena Williams. But she was just so engaging and just lives an amazing lifestyle, and she just shares it. So a lot of it just comes down to the content that you're posting and keeping it interesting and relevant. And then, once you have that, then it's how do you creatively kind of incorporate your partners and your sponsors in a way that seems authentic.
So a few weeks ago, I had Megan Meyer on. Megan is a social coach, social media coach, and she's a guru. She's excellent. It was a great, really good interview. She talked about the different platforms and staggering posts and using different image sizes and resolutions and optimizing for search engines. And if anybody missed it, go back and watch that one. That's a really, really very helpful and informative interview. What technical things have you learned that give race teams or athletes an advantage by, like Megan was saying, have everything 72 DPI, make sure you have your images optimized. If you post on Facebook today, post on Instagram tomorrow, stagger it. Is there anything technical that you've learned or picked up that can give someone an advantage over all the others who are also posting onto social?
Yeah, so it sounds like Megan is all over it, and she's definitely taken it to a different level than even I'll look at. But videos tend to perform really well, and especially on Instagram. Stories have really blown up in terms of Instagram stories, and that's definitely probably one of the most engaging pieces of content that you can post. The tricky part with stories from a tracking perspective is that Instagram doesn't make those public, so you can't track them for value unless the athlete authenticates their account with us. So that does make it challenging, but I wouldn't discourage people from posting stories because there's tremendous value in there. But yeah, it was more the short form video, like typically will outperform photos and text. And just from a best practice standpoint, it's always important to post what they call natively to each platform. So even if you're going to post the same photo or video to Instagram and Facebook, like don't use the share function and post it to both at the same time. And it's really important for like sponsor tagging, because if you hashtag or mention a partner on Instagram, the app mentions, they don't carry over to Facebook. So the link breaks, and so you have to then go edit the post on Facebook to like reconnect it. So it's really important that you just post natively. And the other problem that often arises is that if the screen name for a brand is different on Facebook than it is on Instagram, then you lose the promotional value of that post when you don't post natively.
Does one platform have more value that you can attribute to posts versus others? I know TikTok, you said, is starting to really increase, but would the similar post on Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, maybe Twitter have different actual values, or are they valued about the same?
So they do get valued differently, because the way that our valuation methodology works is that it's a cost per engagement model that we work off of. And the rates that the platforms charge for advertising, that's what we use as our starting point. Okay. And we even take it way deeper than that, because we actually use the rates that brands and agencies are spending on the campaigns. So not just what the platform is like promoting as rate card, we use what brands and agencies are actually spending, but the rates do vary by platform. So Twitter, as an example, like their engagement rates are much less than Facebook or Instagram, but Instagram still carries, one of the higher cost per engagement rates from an advertising perspective. So the same post with the same engagement might get different values depending on what the ad rates are on the platform at the time.
That's interesting. Are you seeing any athletes that are doing a really good job standing out above the rest in their field because of the way they post? And if that's the case, what are they doing different? Like what's adding more value to them when on the field or in the game, they're equal to everybody?
Yeah, so like Letitia is a great example in the skate world. Like she just is head and shoulders above everybody else out there, including the male skaters. And Sky Brown is another one. She's an up and coming female Olympian, also in skate. So they've just done the younger athletes have tended to grown up with social media, so they just have kind of an unfair advantage compared to some of the older athletes that didn't grow up in this era. But it's just part of who they are and the platform that they've created for themselves as an athlete. But yeah, it always comes back to like who's doing the best job with posting the right type of content that people like and engage with and all of that. And they just have like a much better leg up on anybody else out there.
Are there some companies that are using your analytics and your data in order to increase the value, like help their teams increase value because the companies are also using social media? They're taking content from a team and putting it out there. And so because the team or athlete is creating content, they're getting a value and a score from you. Are there companies that are like boosting that and making the value exponential or compound?
Yeah, for sure. There's so there's kind of two parts to that question, but the first one is that brands are absolutely using the data and the insights now to coach their partners more effectively in terms of like, what do they expect? For a while there, brands were, generically saying we want 2 or 3 posts a month, but they weren't specific about which platform do they want it to go to and what type of content and how do you want your brand represented within that content. So we've seen a really big kind of just mental shift in terms of how brands coach their athletes and partners of what they want in social media. So that's kind of the first leg of the stool, is like how they can really drive more value by just doing a better job of collaborating with their partners on it. And then the second piece is, yes, brands are doing that. So when there's kind of really key moments, in a lot of cases, the athlete, team, or league might have a lot more followers than the brand. So they will have the athlete, team, or league post it, and then they'll share it and boost it. Because then it helps get kind of more reach and exposure, and then everyone really benefits from that. But we're definitely seeing a lot more where the brands are pushing their partners to post, because in a lot of cases they'll have like more reach, more followers, more engagement than the brand could get on their own.
Okay, that's cool. So I know that you use image recognition to recognize logos, and I guess what is it, natural language processing? I don't know all the tech terms. You can explain that to us on how you actually scrub the web and you see logos and see images and text. And obviously, if something is hashtagged, then that's pretty easy to find because text is easy to find. But can you find text in an image? If a logo is a word, does that also show up?
Yeah, so so the way we built our system, which makes it pretty unique, is that we have what we call the sport graph. So we tried to create a virtual representation of the whole sport and entertainment ecosystem of. So we're actively tracking about 500,000 different athletes, teams, leagues, event properties, also all the brands and the media properties. And then it goes into entertainers and celebrities and influencers and folks. So where our platform is unique is that we collect everything that's being posted. We're not just looking for a hashtag of something. We literally pull in every single post that's available through the APIs, but then we analyze all those posts for how brands are being promoted. So first we look for text, like we're looking for hashtags and mentions and keywords of a brand. But then second, we'll scan every photo and video to look for logos. And we also have products trained as well. So we can find helmets and cans for like Red Bull. We can find golf clubs, shoes, cars. So we can pick up like what is being promoted in the content. So once we flag a post as having promotion of a brand via text or visual, then we then get into scoring the quality of that promotion. And that's what brands are really using us for, is how is our brand being represented, whether other brands being promoted or was it just us? And then that's how we really score the quality of promotion. And it's a 0 to 100% quality score that we use. And that's how we downweight the value to what we call an adjusted ad value. So yeah, it's kind of fascinating how much you can do with content now, and like how brands are really, looking at it in terms of how they're being promoted and our goals being met.
Yeah, it is. It's amazing. So in just a second, but Tammy said there's a question in the chat room, and we'll get to that in one sec. But while you're on this, you got me thinking, is there anything that you see athletes are doing wrong right now where they could be increasing their value, but they just don't get it? They don't understand the way your system determines value. So your advice to them would be to do this in order to increase the value. Like what are most of the guys out there doing wrong that they could change?
Yeah, so probably the biggest thing, which we see kind of across the board, is doing a single post. They have this big moment in a race or an event or something, and they'll thank all of their sponsors in a single post. So you'll see it in motocross all the time. You'll get the post and it's a podium shot, and then it'll be like 20 hashtags and mentions thanking all of their partners. And so that in our promotion quality scoring gets like hammered, because there's clearly not one brand being promoted, it's all of them. So all of them get a little bit of value, but no one gets a lot of value because the promotion quality is so bad for all of them. So that's probably the number one thing that we always encourage athletes to look at is, make sure that if you're going to promote a brand, like do it deliberately and try and do it in a way that's authentic, because you also don't want it to be over commercial where it looks like an ad, because there's this fine balance that you have to find. And but those are probably the two biggest things, is either over commercializing where it looks like an ad, no one engages with it, or they just promote everybody and then no one gets any value.
Sponsor soup, as we used to call it. Maybe still do. So Tammy, turn your mic up, and then what's the question?
Okay, we actually have two questions now.
I don't know if the volume is up.
Yep, it is.
Okay.
Can you guys hear me? Good. Okay.
Yep.
First question for Facebook and Instagram, there is Business Suite. You can post one pic, but edit individually. Is using this feature still breaking the link?
Yeah, that's a good question. If it's only going to Instagram, or I'm sorry, to Facebook, then probably not. But if it's going to both platforms, you'd probably have to, edit and or do a check, because again, if the screen name for who you're promoting is different on Facebook and Instagram, then it won't link, because as far as we know, like they haven't connected that where they know that, Oakley on Instagram is the same as Oakley on Facebook. And in a lot of cases, there's a lot of different handles that you can use. So we always default to just posting natively, because it's too hard to know if the screen names of who you're promoting are the same on both platforms.
Okay, thanks. And then the second question, when scoring a post for promotional value, does it lower the score when an athlete tags multiple partners, even if their products actually work together?
Yeah, we just said that.
Yeah, so I think that was a follow-on question, but even if they're synergistic, if they're two different brands, it will affect the promotion quality. So only because like we have no way of knowing if brand one and brand two are synergistic or not. So yeah, it will affect the promotion quality in that case. Yeah.
So I want to ask a question. Where do you see the money coming from? I mean, a lot of racers, they'll target the standard brands that you see all over racing. Are they the ones spending the most money, or are you seeing money coming from the outside? We saw Super Bowl commercials that were very unique this year. I'm wondering if that's across all sponsorships.
Yeah, it definitely comes in waves. I think when you look at a sport like motocross as an example, it's kind of, you just naturally want to go after all the big brands and go after Dunlop and Oakley and all the ones that you see on TV all the time. You have to also keep in mind that they're also the ones getting the most inundated with applications and proposals and such. So, and there's only so much money to go around. Your Supercross example is definitely a very kind of real world case right now, where you're seeing a ton of money flow in from crypto companies and gambling companies. And that's kind of the new .com boom, if you will. Like back in, if you go all the way back to 99 and 2000, it was all the .coms that were investing tons of money and sponsoring stadiums and going big in Super Bowl ads and such. So, you know, crypto and gambling, with everything that's going on right now, is kind of that new wave of that. So there is a kind of seasonality to these things where you get, you know, a category will pop and then there's a land grab for market share, and brands are investing a ton of money to stand out. So if you can get out in front of that, that's a great way to do it. But then you have the brands like I just mentioned that are, you know, they've been around for 30, 40 years and they have pretty set marketing budgets. They know what they're spending, and there's not a lot of risk there for them where they're going to, you know, make a decision to go big on something and open the floodgates. So it's all a fine balance, and, you know, finding brands, and, you know, I love sponsorship. I always have. At the end of the day, it comes back to adding value and ROI. So regardless of the brand that you're targeting, how are you going to add value back to that partner to make it work or worth it?
And one question I have is, in today's crowded media landscape, there's so much content out there. What can an athlete do to stand out? And is there anything like on streaming that also gets picked up, or is it just social? Because some properties, you know, a lot of in the past, either on ESPN or NBC Sports or CBS Sports. Now we have a lot of properties like King of the Hammers, the Mint 400. They stream everything. They're not on television. Does that streaming value come into play with Hookit's valuations?
Yeah, so the streaming doesn't currently, but I'm a huge proponent of it because,
okay.
You know, TV has been around forever, and I think it's probably one of the most challenging media platforms there is today. Only because there's so much competition for it, and with all the streaming platforms that are popping up, there's just the ability to access content anywhere. So I think, you know, there's tremendous value in it for sure. And yeah, the Mint 400 example, they've really done a good job of if they didn't have the TV exposure and that kind of coverage, they found an avenue to get it. They also do a great job from a social perspective. So it's, you know, that's the beauty of social and why we love it so much, is that you can kind of do whatever you want. And if you're good at content and you're good at engaging fans and you keep growing fans, like, you literally have created your own media platform to do, you know, drive your own destiny. So that's why we love social so much. But yeah, TV and streaming, you're still kind of at the beck and call of whoever's producing that content, and you've got much less control, but they still add tremendous value at the end of the day.
Right. And then, so with social, then athletes can actually stand out then even more so than what perhaps they get in terms of ratings from television or streaming. You gave the example of Brazilian skateboarder who does a phenomenal job. In the United States, do you see any examples of athletes that are standing out in the crowded media mix? And if, or maybe if there's not a specific example, because you don't want to say one person, are there things that racers and properties can do to stand out that would that would increase their value, the way you look at the value?
Yeah, there's you know, I'll go back to motocross again, but like, so athletes like Dean Wilson have done an amazing job of, like, he's always been, you know, really good at social media. He's always drives a ton of engagement. He isn't always at the top of the leaderboard, but he's been able to kind of maintain his value and do a good job because of his social presence. And then you've, you know, got athletes that win and don't fully embrace that. And a lot more of them now are seeing the importance of it because you know, it's, you know, brands want the full package. You know, they want wins, and they want like exposure and visibility and promotion as well. So you kind of have to do both, and it's kind of one of the things that we saw early on in social was that the top athletes just didn't want anything to do with it. They're like, my job is to go out and win and do this, and if they weren't embracing social, then it was really difficult for them to, like, kind of, you know, finish the value chain that they need to create. And then you have folks like Ken Block, who you know, started DC Shoes and then got into rally cars, and with his Gymkhana stuff, like, he's just done a ridiculous job of, I think some of those views now are up over 1 billion views. When you look at all of his Gymkhana videos, like, that's a ton of exposure. And, you know, he's done a phenomenal job just being a content machine. and he, created his own media property, and
Yeah.
this whole Gymkhana series that he did is just phenomenal. And he's been able to ride that wave. I forget when he sold DC, but it was probably 15 years ago. And he's done just a phenomenal job, building out this whole Gymkhana series. So, so I think, anything that you can do to stand out. And if you are fortunate enough where you're winning and you're a top athlete, then just embrace the social side and embrace your fans. And that's what social does for you.
Nice. Now, esports is something that's new, and some racers are starting to get into it. Some are doing it full time, like Mitchell DeYoung, but others, use it to practice. Is there any value in esports yet, or will there be in the future if there's not now?
Yeah, I mean, esports, it was definitely a huge hot button a couple of years ago, and it's definitely here to stay. There was an athlete that goes by Ninja, Tyler Blevins, but at one point he had kind of one moment where he drove more engagement than Ronaldo one month, and no one had ever even heard of the guy. And I literally saw him in the rankings, and I was like, who the hell is Tyler Blevins? And it's like, oh, that's Ninja.
Fortnite. Yeah, he won the Fortnite the tournament, right?
I didn't even know who he was at the time, but so there's clearly opportunities there to drive like massive engagement. The tricky part about it is it definitely feels like it's probably the future generations, and like even watching my son, like he'll sit there and watch Minecraft videos, and of people playing Minecraft. I don't get it, but it's definitely the way that younger generations are consuming content and gaming, and they're using it to get better at games. Probably the biggest challenge with it is just how brands get integrated into that. And so we haven't personally seen it from a sponsorship perspective be a huge value driver, just because it's so hard to integrate brands into it. Probably with the exception of some of the iRacing or iDrive?
Yeah, new Coca-Cola does the iRacing. That just started last year, so that's brand new. I'm so curious to see how that.
Other ways to really do it where you get top drivers in and they're racing against each other in an esport environment, and like those things have been really successful. But it's slightly different than sitting there watching, Ninja play Fortnite.
Right. So Tammy says there's another question.
Yes, got a couple questions. Real quick, Joe, did your second question get answered?
Thumbs up.
Okay. All right. So the next one is I tried to build a marketing platform and some prepaid media and pitch that to sponsors. Why am I not getting any traction?
Yeah, so if I understand it correctly, if he built out a marketing platform and then put some prepaid media behind it, I think from a sales perspective, it's hard to sell what is not there yet, would be my guess, if they're not getting traction, because it's just because you're putting media behind it doesn't mean that it's actually going to happen. So, and I think a lot of it comes down to what is the marketing platform, and does that align with what the brand even wants or needs? But hopefully I answered that question.
Okay, and the next one is there such a thing as strength in the campaign? Would a Goodwill designed and engaging campaign event ever help to gain a sponsorship, or is it all based on social engagement and prior relationship?
So when you say Goodwill, I'm assuming that means social causes. Now, I read a Nielsen sponsorship report recently. It was from 2021. And this report, I don't remember the exact numbers, but it did say that social causes are increasing in value to some sponsors. And I don't know if that's what the asker meant by Goodwill, but Scott.
Yeah, if I read it correctly, I think if you're doing a campaign for Goodwill, will that create future value and benefit to grow a partnership? Absolutely. And especially if it's a campaign that is in line with what a brand is trying to do. So if that's how I understood the question about the Goodwill piece. But from a cause perspective, all the bigger brands are looking at causes now. And even our media exposure, it's helpful for probably 80% of the brands out there. But then you get into the world of the Coca-Colas and the Pepsis and Budweisers. They don't have an exposure problem. Media values are kind of an afterthought because
exactly.
They don't need to worry about, did we get $10 million or $12 million in value? It's how many cans did we sell at the stadium? So they're getting much deeper into aligning with causes and so things like sustainability, human rights, women's rights, and they're really trying to get like deeper down what they call the funnel, because they know that if they can create good brand perception and goodwill with the consumer base, that it will result in more sales. So it's less about the total exposure and more about like, what's the value of that exposure, and is it aligned with like really important core values to the brand, because they think that that'll help improve brand perception and intent, and all those kind of really important metrics that the biggest brands look at.
That's true, because your tangible assets can be valued according to comparable media rates. You just get a rate card from whatever the newspaper, magazine, TV show, whatever is, billboards on a freeway, and you can quantify that. The tangible assets and values are quantifiable, but your intangibles, the reputation and legacy and prestige, those are priceless. So
Yep.
you can show a sponsor tangible values and put a number on a program, and then you can boost that by many times by showing the intangibles.
Yep.
And that's what you do. You value intangibles, because technically quantitative and qualitative, that's tangible and intangible, and you're valuing the qualitative.
Yeah, I think it's partially true. I mean, we've been just continuously evolving what we do, because when we first put a dollar value on social content, that was the first time anyone had ever seen it before. And then we got much smarter about scoring the quality of that promotion. I would definitely say the world we live in right now and where it's going is that quality, or is that level of promotion and the exposure that we're getting even what we want? Because it's not about having the most dollar value tied to a media exposure. It's more about, are we reaching the right target consumer? Does this athlete have the right fan following that aligns with our consumer focus? So we're getting way deeper into, brand fit, brand impact. And fortunately, like social, there's just so much data out there that you can use that to better align. So I'd say that I feel like we've kind of been there and done it with the media exposure side, and it's all important, but now we're trying to figure out, like, is this exposure good or not, based on what this brand is who they're trying to reach, and is it the right consumer that they're getting the exposure to? So I'd say that there's a little bit of media value fatigue, and so we're not trying to present the biggest numbers. It's really, is this good or not?
How do sponsors use the data? What are the key metrics that they actually look at? And I know KPIs, key performance indicators, are there some that stick out more than others that sponsors put more value to, or do they pretty much just blend it together and come up with an average?
Yeah, so from at the highest level, they look at things, they still look at followers, but more important than that is the engagement and the engagement rate. So how engaged are the followers that a partner has? And then into our like proprietary metrics are max ad value, promotion quality, adjusted ad value. Those are all super important. But they're, the first kind of big one that really came on after that was really the audience and demographic data. So looking at, who's the target consumer, or who are we reaching as a result of this partnership, and is this our target consumer? But I'd say where it's going more now is just in December, we rolled out benchmarking. So brands can now benchmark their kind of metrics against other brands, and they can see, like, is this good or not? And in a lot of cases, they're benchmarking against competitors. But in other cases, they're benchmarking against brands like Nike and Red Bull, because that's kind of, what they aspire to do. So there's a lot of different ways that you can do that, but it's, so the metrics were kind of the first step, but then we quickly moved into, like, is this good or not, based on best in class and who in the industry is doing it better. So that benchmarking was kind of a breakthrough for us. And then the second thing that we just rolled out this week is what we call earned media. So a lot of what we track is, take an athlete, everything they post to what we call their owned accounts. So it's the account that I control. That's what we've been valuing for the last, 8 years. But now what we're valuing is the halo effect of who else is talking about that athlete. It could be another brand, it could be a media property, it could be a peer athlete. And is my brand also being promoted in that content? So now we have a whole earned media value metric, which shows, like, what do I get from their owned accounts? And then what do I get from everybody else who's talking about this athlete? And those numbers are fascinating, because it's all across the board. You'll look at maybe a motocross racer, and they might get the same amount of value on their owned as they get from earned. But then you look at like Tiger Woods, and he gets 80x more value from earned than he does from his own, because he's not super active in social. So like those numbers are all across the board, and I think the bigger the name, the bigger the disparity between the two. But it's just fun, like rolling these things out and just seeing what happens.
That's interesting. So it kind of tells me that if you're an athlete and you don't like creating social media, maybe you're old school like me, and your camera's not always on your face taking selfies, just hang out with people who are doing social media. Maybe you can piggyback their visibility.
Yeah, you made that comment before, and I forgot to mention another way that athletes can really kind of move the needle is if they have a smaller following and they're really kind of newer to social media, go team up with people that have big followings. Because if they're posting about you and mentioning you on their channels, like you'll get more followers, you'll get more engagement. It's this whole network effect thing that happens where the athletes that are getting covered by the biggest brands and big athletes and media properties, and they're all getting mentioned, it's all going to result in more followers and more engagement on your own accounts. So to try to be creative in who posts about you when you're out there.
That's really good to know. I never thought about it like that, but it's a fascinating new trick and tool that we can use to get more visibility. Are you seeing any trends from overseas? I know that there seems to be a lot more investment dollars coming in from Asia. Does Hookit have any data that can substantiate that and validate that? Is more money coming in from China and overseas than it had in the past for sponsorships?
Yeah, it's still really early, even for us. Most of our partners and customers are based here in the US and based in Europe. Okay. China creates its own set of problems because they block a lot of the US platforms, and with data privacy is a massive priority for the entire industry right now, because everything was so free flowing for the longest time, and then there's the whole Cambridge Analytica thing that happened a few years ago with politics. Yeah. So the platforms really started kind of locking down on what data you could access, because it was getting misused. It was dangerous, and it probably still is, to be honest. And so I think the platforms are taking the right steps to start controlling data privacy. And we've even done things on our end where when an athlete comes in, they can choose who they want to share their data with. Is it with all my sponsors, a particular sponsor? Because we want to be really sensitive to that as well. But I think China has definitely built a wall around itself where like Facebook and Instagram and YouTube are not like big platforms down there. It's more Weibo and TikTok, so and WeChat. So yeah, it creates challenges from a tracking and measurement perspective. But yeah, so we don't have enough kind of data yet to see is there more money flowing from there or not. But it does create problems with the platforms and which where they carry the most followers and engagement because of the local laws.
That's interesting. Yeah, obviously privacy laws and data laws in China. Are you seeing any? And it's something I have no information on this, and I'm not familiar with it. So if I'm asking a dumb question, let me know. But how are privacy laws affecting what athletes can do online, or are privacy laws affecting anything? Because I know that they change frequently. Every time I go on a website nowadays, it asks me I will authorize them to place a cookie, on my computer. And it gets annoying after a while, but I guess that's part of the privacy law changes.
Yeah, so I think a lot of that started with what's called GDPR in Europe. But yeah, so it's just making you aware that when you visit a website, like there's a cookie getting put on your computer and they track you everywhere, and that's more kind of on the website of things. But I think privacy is going to be, I think people don't even realize how kind of dangerous and out of control it got. I mean, everyone knows that, you visit a website and then you go to 4 other websites and you see the same ad and you're getting targeted for things that you were looking at, so that was all digital advertising stuff through cookies, and people didn't know how they were being tracked online. And then they finally got to a point where you could block cookies, but certain websites just won't operate without them. So that's why they're forcing you to opt into it. But I think it's just important to be careful of that. I mean, the second kind of big one that's also super creepy is that, you're talking about something while you're using Facebook and then you see an ad for it. That's also really weird. So I think, there's so much there's so many things happening out there, and social has to be, viewed, especially by parents, as there needs to be a lot of education for the kids that are out there right now, because it can be pretty dangerous.
Amen to that. And then I guess where I'm also leading, and sort of what I'm thinking about now, is when I post on Facebook, only a small percentage of the people who I'm friends with will see a post of mine. Are there ways that when athletes post on behalf of sponsors that they can reach more people? Are there ways to either trick the algorithms or work with the algorithms so that you can actually maximize engagements? An athlete might be thinking that they're posting and engaging, but then Facebook or Instagram or whatever the algorithms are for the social media platform, it doesn't give them access to all the followers. And are there ways to get around that? Or is there anything that you've learned that athletes can do to improve their value?
Yeah, it's it's probably a better question for who was it that came on, the social expert?
Megan Meyer. Okay, yeah.
Megan, yeah. She probably is more in tune with the algorithms than I am.
She talked about algorithms, actually.
Yeah, because I mean, that's the goal of the platform, is that they're surfacing up the most relevant content for each person that comes on. So they're tracking behavior for everything that all their followers are doing, and then they're trying to serve up the stuff that's most relevant to keep them coming back. So if your stuff isn't relevant to some of your followers, they're going to bury it,
Okay. And then Hookit tracks everything then, regardless. I mean, maybe you take a second. I know it's an hour-long conversation on how your algorithms work or how your programs work, but how is it that you can scrub the entire internet, which is massive, and collect all this data? And we'll try to do it real quick because we're almost at the point where you have some big news I'd like you to announce, and then we'll do some Q&A at the end when I get on my other little camera.
Yeah,
but
so I guess
how
the
does
one
Hookit
clarification.
do it? Sounds like you're performing magic,
Well, so one clarification: we're not scrubbing the entire web. We're limited to Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, YouTube, Weibo, VK, Twitch, and TikTok. So so those platforms have what's called APIs that allow you to access data and content or posts that are being made to the platforms. But then there's limitations with the APIs as well. So on Instagram, for example, unless the athlete authenticates with Hookit, we're not allowed to capture their stories. So we can only look at posts that are in feed. So we don't really have access to the inner workings of how the algorithms work. We just know that a post was made, and we know how many people engage with the post. And that's really kind of at the core of what we're aggregating or collecting. But from searching the entire web, we can't do that. And so a lot of what we've done, it's we're a software company, so it's all done through public APIs that allow you to access public information. So we're and we're very strict internally about data privacy and making sure we're not collecting things we shouldn't have. And at the end of the day, I mean, we're tracking sponsorship value. So it's I feel like what we do as a business is helping both sides of the desk prove value and those types of things. So we're not using it to disrupt or influence political outcomes and really bad stuff.
Well, you're doing it enough that you attracted a suitor, and a couple of weeks ago you had some really big news. We'd like to share that with us.
Yeah, so we announced last week, so we got acquired by Core Software. They great business, and we've known them for a while, but we're both kind of very focused on the sponsorship and technology space. They work with 800 or so teams, leagues, event properties. So I think 90% of the big 5 teams and leagues in the States use them, and globally for that matter. Wow. So we're all aimed at solving a big problem in the industry. And we talked about this a lot over the years, is that when you look at it, there's about $150 billion being spent on sponsorship and sports marketing, and it's still probably the most archaic and unknown form of ROI out there, but it keeps growing every single year. So our whole kind of reason for being is, from the Sponsor House days of helping connect amateur athletes with sponsors, it's now about how do we make the industry make sponsorship more effective so that it keeps growing and the money doesn't go into like digital advertising or something. So both of us are very aligned, and they're the leader in really what they call engagement marketing solutions, and they work a lot with the team and league side to help them kind of prove and justify their value back to sponsors. And then meanwhile, we work with 100 brands. So, and we're full data and analytics and sponsorship measurement. So the two businesses together just make a ton of sense. And we're not done yet by any means. My business partner RJ and I, we're going along and helping continue growing the business, and our whole team is coming along. And we've been really fortunate over the years to have just an amazing team that has helped get us to where we are today. And we're looking forward to seeing the vision through with Core.
Excellent. Well, I remember a few years ago, we were in Napa, and you were telling me, I hired 35 data scientists last year. And I was like, holy crap, 35 in 1 year. That's a lot.
It was probably total employees, but yeah, we did hire a bunch of data scientists, people way smarter than me to help make sense of all this stuff.
So I'm going to head over to my other computer or my other camera, and we'll do a little Q&A. Scott, thank you so much. But before we go, are there any last pieces of advice or recommendations that you have to any athlete, or in this case, we have a lot of racers on the call, that they could do something that they could do tomorrow to increase their value to sponsors, something that you see most of them aren't doing, but they should? Any just last words, tips, advice, recommendations? And
yeah,
while you're answering, I'm going to head over. Okay.
Yeah, I'll probably have to go back to what we were talking to athletes about in 2001 and 2002, which is, there's a lot of athletes out there, and they're all trying to stand out, and they're chasing the dream of being a professional athlete, and everyone's goal is to get sponsored, and you feel like if you got sponsored in some way that you've kind of made it. Everything is a step, and Sponsor House was really geared more towards the amateurs who were coming up through the ranks, and most of the deals that were happening at the time were they're pro form deals. They're not getting free product, they're not getting paid, and that was a really hard discussion to have with people, like, well, this isn't sponsorship. And it's like, well, what do you do? And and have you won a national championship, or are you going to Loretta's next year? I don't think so. So there's a lot of that expectation where athletes come out and they feel very kind of deserving and have high expectations. And I think it's important that sponsorship, and literally this is stuff I was talking about 20 years ago, it's a two-way street, and you've got to add value to the partner that you're working with, and not have a lot of expectations. And until you're an Eli Tomac or winning championships, you're earning your keep, and it has to keep repeating itself every single year. So but with all that said, I think don't go after sponsors for the sake of just getting a sponsorship. You can learn about the business relationship early on, as whether it's a discount that you're receiving, or you're actually getting one of the few that's actually getting paid. You have to make it worth it to the brand, and doing everything you possibly can. A lot of people don't know this about RJ and I, but when we were racing amateur motocross, we started a team. We grew up in Warwick, New York, which is a small town upstate, and we actually started a team called Team Warwick. And because fortunately, like, the name of our town was like,
it's a cool name though,
kind of cool. So
cool.
So yeah, we were Team Warwick, and we went to all the local businesses, and so we were getting like spark plugs and discounts at the local Napa Auto Parts store. We got free pasta dinners the night before races at the pizza place, and but it was but we bring all of our friends in, and our parents shop where we got deals, and so it was like very localized, but we kind of understood all that stuff back then. At the time, we were 16 and 17 years old. So yeah, it's all about value, and whatever you get from a sponsor, like, you have to deliver value in return, or else it's not going to work long term.
Yeah, totally agree. Well, thank you very much, man. Thanks for taking the time. I appreciate it. With that, I'm going to officially end this, but anybody who wants to stay on, ask Scott any question you want. The floor is yours.
Thanks, guys.
Actually, yeah,